In the quiet hush of a late evening, when the world outside has settled into its own rhythmic slumber, have you ever found yourself truly alone in an old apartment listening? Not to the distant hum of traffic or the gentle creaks of an aging building settling in for the night, but to something else. Something that whispers just beyond the edge of explanation, a sound that nudges at the corners of your mind, leaving you wondering if you're truly the only one awake, the only one hearing. That's where my story begins, in a small, unassuming apartment in the heart of a city that never truly sleeps, but sometimes pretends to. It was an old place, the kind with high ceilings and tall, narrow windows that let in slivers of reluctant morning light. The floorboards, polished by decades of unknown footsteps, groaned and sighed beneath my own. I loved it in a way for its character, its sense of history, and the way it seemed to hold countless stories within its very walls. I'd moved in on a whim, drawn by the affordable rent and the promise of a fresh start. It was an escape in many ways from a life that had grown too loud, too demanding. Here, I sought solace, quiet, and perhaps a touch of the romanticized solitude that only an old city apartment can offer. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking, arranging, and trying to make the space feel like my own. I painted the living room a calming shade of pale blue, a color I hoped would absorb any lingering anxieties. I bought new furniture, soft throws, and a collection of plants that seemed to thrive in the filtered light. Everything felt new, fresh, a canvas upon which to paint a different future. I'd spend my evenings reading by the window, watching the city lights twinkle into existence, or listening to jazz music softly playing on an old record player I'd found at a flea market. It was idyllic, a peaceful retreat from the world. Then the sounds began. They were subtle at first, so faint that I questioned if I'd truly heard them at all. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching, like tiny claws on wood, coming from somewhere within the walls of my bedroom. I'd pause my reading, hold my breath, and listen intently, but just as quickly as it appeared, it would vanish, leaving me to wonder if it had merely been my imagination, a trick of the old building's settling bones. I attributed it to mice, perhaps, or even squirrels making their way through the attic. It was an old building, after all, and these things were to be expected. I told myself that, over and over, trying to convince the small, insistent voice in the back of my mind that urged me to consider other possibilities. As the weeks turned into months, the sounds grew bolder, more distinct. The scratching became more frequent, no longer limited to the bedroom but sometimes echoing from the kitchen wall, or even from behind the built-in bookshelf in the living room. It wasn't a frantic, desperate scratching, like an animal trying to escape. Instead, it was slow, deliberate, almost investigatory. It sounded like something was exploring, testing the boundaries of its unseen domain. Sometimes it would be accompanied by a faint, rhythmic tapping, like a soft knuckle rapping against a wooden surface. Just once, then silence. I started to keep track, mentally noting the times and locations of these strange occurrences. They seemed to happen most often in the late hours of the night, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the city was at its quietest and my own senses were heightened by the darkness. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, trying to decipher the source, the meaning, the why. Was it the pipes, the ancient wiring, the building's structural integrity finally giving way after all these years. I tried every rational explanation I could conjure, clinging to them like lifelines in an ocean of growing unease. One particularly still night, I was woken by a different sound entirely. A faint, almost melodic hum, incredibly low in pitch, like a distant, distorted lullaby. It seemed to emanate from the floor beneath my bed. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding in my chest, straining my ears to catch it again. It faded, then returned, a ghostly vibration that seemed to seep up through the very foundation of the building. I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet touching the cool wooden floor, and knelt down, pressing my ear against the polished planks. Nothing, just the faint, familiar creaks of the old wood, now sounding less like a home and more like a sentient being breathing around me. I tried to talk myself out of it, to blame the building, the wind, my own overactive imagination. But the sounds persisted, becoming more and more a part of the apartment's unique character, a strange, unseen roommate I was forced to coexist with. I started leaving the radio on low, a soft static, a murmur of human voices. Hopping it would drown out the unexplained. It helped sometimes, but the truly unsettling sounds always found a way to pierce through, cutting through the background noise with an unnerving clarity. There was a particular sound that began to emerge, one that truly started to fray my nerves. It was a soft, almost hesitant thud, like something light falling onto the floor above me or perhaps inside the ceiling. It wasn't heavy, not like a person dropping something, but rather a small, soft impact, as if a feather or a single leaf had drifted down onto a hard surface. But there was no one above me. I was on the top floor of a 3-story building. And it wasn't outside. The sound was distinctly internal, muffled by plaster and wood, yet still undeniably there. It would happen once, sometimes twice, always in the dead of night, followed by a profound, echoing silence that felt heavier than usual. I began to walk around the apartment late at night, a silent patrol trying to pinpoint the origin. I'd press my ear to walls, tap on floorboards, even shine a flashlight into the darkest corners of closets and beneath sinks, searching for a logical explanation. I inspected the vents, the heating system, anything that could possibly explain the strange acoustics of my new home. I found nothing. No signs of rodents, no loose pipes, no creaking machinery. The apartment, in the harsh light of day, seemed utterly normal, utterly silent. It was only when the sun dipped below the horizon and the city hummed its evening lullaby that the mysterious symphony would begin again. One evening, while making dinner, I heard what sounded distinctly like a very faint, almost breath-like sigh coming from the wall behind my stove. It was so close, so intimate, that I dropped the spatula. I stood frozen, my heart doing a frantic dance against my ribs, listening, waiting. It didn't repeat. Just the gentle bubbling of the pot on the stove and the distant city murmur. I tried to rationalize it, a draft, the old pipes expanding and contracting, anything but what my mind was starting to suggest. But the hair on my arm stood on end, a prickling sensation that lingered long after the sound had vanished. I started to tell friends about it in hushed tones, almost jokingly at first. My apartment has personality, I'd say, forcing a light laugh. It talks to me. But as the stories became more frequent, more detailed, their smiles would falter, replaced by expressions of mild concern. "Maybe you should get it checked out," one friend suggested, "for pests, I mean, or a carbon monoxide leak." I did, of course. I called an exterminator who found no evidence of insects or rodents. I even had the landlord send someone to check the ventilation and heating systems. They found nothing amiss, concluding that it was just an old building settling. The dismissive tone did little to alleviate my growing sense of unease. The scratching continued, the tapping grew more confident, and the faint thuds became a regular feature of my nights. I found myself sleeping less and less, often dozing off in the early hours of the morning, only to wake feeling unrested and hyperaware. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage for an unseen performance, a silent play unfolding just beyond my perception. I started to wonder if I was truly alone, or if some unseen presence shared my space, subtly making itself known through these inexplicable sounds. I began to develop a strange sort of routine. Before bed, I'd walk through each room, turning on every light, almost as if to prove to myself that there was nothing there, no shadowy figures lurking in the corners. I'd check under the bed, behind the curtains, even inside the empty shower stall, a ritual of reassurance that never quite worked. As soon as the lights were off and I was tucked into bed, the familiar tension would return, the waiting for the next whisper, the next tap, the next inexplicable disturbance. One night the thud was different. It wasn't soft. It was distinct, sharp, and it came from directly above my head in the ceiling. It sounded like a small, heavy object had been dropped, not fallen. And it wasn't just one thud. It was followed by another and then another, a slow, deliberate rhythm like someone packing just above my head. I sat up in bed, straining to hear over the rapid beating of my own heart. The packing continued, a measured, heavy tread that vibrated through the ceiling joists. It was unmistakable. Someone was up there, but there was no up there. Just the attic, a crawl space, sealed off and inaccessible. I got out of bed, my feet cold against the wooden floor, and moved into the living room, looking up at the ceiling. The sounds of packing continued, now seeming to move across the entire length of the apartment, from what would be my bedroom above to the kitchen. It was too regular, too intentional to be a trick of the building. This was something else. This was a presence. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, bathed in the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the tall windows, listening to the impossible footsteps above me. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a primal fear that transcended any rational explanation. I eventually retreated to the couch, pulling a blanket tightly around me, not daring to go back into the bedroom while the packing continued. I must have drifted off because I woke with a start to the sound of something rolling across the floor or perhaps dragging in the kitchen. It was a low, scraping sound, followed by a soft bump, as if something had been gently nudged into place. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Complete, utter silence. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My apartment is making strange noises, and I think someone is packing in my non-existent attic. They'd think I was crazy. The next morning I inspected the kitchen. Nothing out of place. The floor was clean, the counters undisturbed. Yet the memory of that dragging sound, that soft bump, was vivid, stubbornly real. I began to feel a profound sense of isolation, not just from the outside world but within my own home. The apartment, once my refuge, was slowly transforming into something else, something less comforting, more watched. I started to notice other subtle shifts. My keys, which I always placed on a small dish by the door, would sometimes be found on the coffee table. A book I was reading would be open to a different page than where I'd left it. Small, insignificant details, perhaps, but collectively, they added to the growing sense that I wasn't the only inhabitant of this old building. It was as if something was moving things, gently, almost playfully, trying to get my attention. The most unnerving of these occurrences happened one afternoon while I was out. I came back to find my bedside lamp, which was usually on the nightstand, placed precisely in the middle of my bed, its cord neatly coiled. It wasn't knocked over, it was placed. Carefully. Deliberately. That was the moment I stopped trying to rationalize. That was the moment I acknowledged that whatever was happening, it wasn't just sounds. It was an interaction. I began to speak aloud to the empty rooms in soft, tentative whispers, hoping to communicate with whatever unseen entity shared my space. "Hello," I'd say, my voice barely audible. "Is anyone there?" I never received a verbal answer, of course, but sometimes, after a quiet inquiry, the scratching would resume, or a gentle tap would echo from a nearby wall, almost like a response, a confirmation. It was a strange, unsettling dialogue, a conversation carried out in sounds and silences. I started researching the building's history, poring over old city archives and local newspaper clippings, hoping to find some explanation, some forgotten tragedy, some spectral tenant. The building itself was old, dating back to the late 1800s, having served as a family home, then a boarding house, and finally these small apartments. There were no records of violent deaths, no scandalous disappearances, no notorious residents. Just a quiet, unremarkable history, seemingly devoid of the drama I was now experiencing. The sounds, however, became undeniably more personal. I'd hear what sounded like very soft, distant footsteps following me as I moved from room to room. When I stopped, they stopped. When I resumed walking, they would resume, a phantom echo of my own movements. It was never loud enough to be alarming, more like the gentle padding of bare feet on carpet, even though my floors were bare wood. It was an ethereal accompaniment to my daily life, a constant reminder of the unseen presence. The distinct thud in the ceiling evolved, too. It started to sound less like an object being dropped and more like a gentle, rhythmic bouncing, as if a small, light ball were being bounced softly against the attic floor. Thump, 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 a quiet, persistent rhythm that would sometimes last for minutes, then abruptly cease, leaving me in the echoing silence once more. It was almost childlike, innocent, yet profoundly unsettling in its impossibility. I began to feel a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Who or what was this unseen companion? Was it lonely, playful, malicious? I couldn't discern its intentions, only its presence communicated through these subtle, baffling auditory cues. I found myself leaving small things out: a shiny coin on the coffee table, a colorful feather I'd found on a walk, almost as offerings, hopping to elicit a clearer response, a more direct sign. But the interactions remained limited to the sounds, the faint movements, the inexplicable whispers in the walls. One evening, I was sitting in my living room reading when I distinctly heard what sounded like a soft, breathy whisper right next to my ear. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a soft exhalation, a gentle puff of air as if someone had leaned in close to me, then pulled back. I froze, every nerve ending in my body screaming. I slowly turned my head, my eyes scanning the empty space beside me. Nothing. The air was still. The room was empty. Yet the sensation was so vivid, so real, that I could almost feel the phantom breath on my skin. That was the moment the fear truly became palpable. It wasn't just sounds anymore. It was an encroaching presence, something that was drawing closer, becoming more tactile, more immediate. I considered moving, finding a new apartment, escaping the inexplicable. But a strange reluctance held me back. Part of me, a small, stubborn part, wanted to understand, wanted to unravel the mystery of this old apartment and its unseen inhabitant. The whispers continued, sometimes from across the room, sometimes seeming to emanate from directly behind me. They were never distinct enough to form words, always just a soft, drawn-out sigh, a lingering breath, a subtle suggestion of a voice. It was like being on the verge of understanding something profoundly important, only for it to slip just out of reach, dissolving into the silence before I could grasp its meaning. This auditory teasing was almost more frustrating than outright screams would have been. I started talking to the space more directly, no longer just hello, but more reflective thoughts. "Are you happy here?" I'd ask the empty air. "What do you want?" Sometimes a faint tap would respond, a solitary sound that seemed to acknowledge my question without truly answering it. It was like living with a shy, invisible child, always present, always observing, but rarely engaging in a conventional way. The scratching in the walls, which had once been a source of mild annoyance, now felt almost comforting, a familiar presence in the silence. It was like a constant reassurance that I wasn't entirely alone, even if that companionship was ethereal and unexplained. The tapping, too, became a strange kind of rhythm, a punctuation mark in the quiet narrative of my nights. Then came the music. Faintly, almost imperceptibly, I started to hear snippets of old-fashioned melodies. It was like hearing a music box playing from far away, a sweet tune that would drift through the walls, then fade, leaving me to wonder if I'd truly heard it or merely imagined it. It sounded like an old lullaby, something from a different era, a melody that carried a sense of longing and nostalgia. This wasn't the hum from before. This was clearly structured music, even if it was incredibly faint. I'd lie in bed trying to identify the tune, to place it, but it was always too fleeting, too distant. Yet it was undeniably music, a delicate, almost ethereal melody that seemed to weave itself into the fabric of the old apartment. It added a new layer to the mystery, suggesting a past, a story, a memory that was now being gently played out for me, the unwitting listener. One night the music was clearer than ever, a full, mournful melody that seemed to be playing from the living room. I got up, slowly, cautiously, and crept towards the sound. As I approached the living room doorway, the music grew louder, more distinct, a beautiful, haunting tune that brought a lump to my throat. It was a waltz, I realized, an old-fashioned, romantic waltz. I peered into the dark living room, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city outside. There was nothing there. No record player, no radio, no source for the music. It was simply there, filling the empty space with its sorrowful beauty. I stood in the doorway, mesmerized, listening to the impossible music, the melody wrapping around me like an invisible embrace. It continued for several minutes, a full, unbroken rendition of the waltz before slowly, gradually fading away, note by beautiful note, until only the silence remained, a silence that now felt profound and heavy, imbued with the lingering echoes of the music. After that night, the nature of the sounds shifted again. The scratching became less frequent, the tapping less insistent. The thuds and the whispers grew softer, more ethereal, almost as if the presence was retreating, becoming more distant. But in their place, the music sometimes returned, always faint, always fleeting, a gentle reminder of the beautiful, impossible waltz. I began to feel a strange sense of loss, a quiet melancholy that settled over me as the sounds grew fainter. It was as if a friend, an invisible companion, was slowly slipping away. The fear, which had once been so dominant, was replaced by a quiet longing, a desire to understand, to connect, to hear the music once more. The apartment, which had once been a source of unsettling mystery, now felt empty in a different way. The silence was no longer a relief, but a void where once there had been whispers, taps, and the ghost of a waltz. I found myself missing the strange occurrences, the inexplicable interactions that had woven themselves into the tapestry of my daily life. I continued to live in the apartment for several more months, but the sounds never returned with the same intensity. Occasionally, I would hear a faint tap, or a whisper so soft I'd question if it was just the wind. The music, however, never played again. The apartment had returned to its normal, quiet existence, its secrets seemingly having receded back into the depths of its old walls. I still live in that apartment years later, and sometimes in the deepest hours of the night when the city is truly asleep, I find myself listening, not for the old sounds, not for the scratching or the tapping or the music, but for a different kind of quiet. A quiet that now feels different, imbued with the memory of the unexplained, the echo of a presence that once shared my space. And in that quiet, I sometimes feel a lingering sense of wonder, a gentle reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, woven into the very fabric of old buildings and the stories they hold. The unexplained sounds in my old apartment have become a part of its history, a part of my own story, a quiet, lingering melody in the background of my life. The memory of those unexplained sounds, the whispers and the phantom waltz, became a quiet, almost sacred part of my experience in that apartment. It wasn't a haunting in the traditional sense, not with malevolent intent or chilling apparitions. Instead, it was more like a subtle, ongoing conversation with the unseen, a gentle unfolding of a narrative that existed just beyond the veil of ordinary perception. And even though the intensity of the occurrences waned, their impression on me never truly faded. I found myself becoming more attuned to the nuances of sound, more sensitive to the almost imperceptible shifts in atmosphere that an old building can present. The silence itself became richer, no longer just an absence of noise, but a canvas upon which the echoes of past mysteries might, at any moment, subtly reappear. I remember one crisp autumn evening. Long after the most distinct sounds had ceased, I was sitting by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the leaves drift down from the ancient trees that lined the street outside. A sudden, very faint shimmer of light, almost like a tiny, fleeting spark, caught my eye in the periphery of my vision, emanating from the corner of the living room near the old built-in bookshelf. I turned my head quickly, but it was gone. Just a brief, almost playful flash, like the reflection of light on a piece of dust, yet it felt different, more intentional. I smiled then, a small, knowing smile, attributing it to my unseen companion, a final, almost mischievous wave goodbye from a presence that had once shared my space so intimately. It was a comfortable thought, a way to reconcile the strange experiences with the quiet reality of my life. Over time, I found that I no longer felt fear when I thought of those sounds. Instead, a peculiar sense of nostalgia would wash over me. I missed the gentle tapping, the phantom footsteps, even the subtle shifts of objects, because they were a unique form of companionship, a connection to something ethereal and profoundly mysterious. It was as if I had been granted a temporary glimpse into a hidden layer of existence, a secret world that coexisted with our own, just slightly out of sync, communicating through whispers and echoes. The apartment, in its quietude, had become a repository of these memories, each creak of the floorboards or sigh of the wind now holding a deeper, more resonant meaning. My daily routines continued, of course. Work, errands, social engagements, life went on. But there was always this quiet undercurrent of awareness, a constant attentiveness to the subtle nuances of my surroundings. I'd find myself pausing mid-sentence just to listen, to gauge the silence, to see if anything would break its delicate equilibrium. And sometimes, very rarely, a faint, almost imperceptible thud would echo from the ceiling, so soft that it could easily be dismissed as the building settling. But to me, it was a gentle caress of memory, a faint whisper from the past. I often wondered what stories the previous inhabitants of the apartment might have had. Did they also hear the sounds? Did they feel the presence? Or was I uniquely receptive, somehow open to the subtle frequencies of this particular place? It's a question that still lingers, a part of the grander mystery that the apartment holds. Perhaps the sounds were a manifestation of residual energy, an imprint of past emotions and experiences left behind like faded photographs in the walls. Or perhaps, as my earlier thoughts had suggested, it was a more conscious entity, shy and ethereal, simply passing through or perhaps simply being. One spring afternoon, a neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for decades, stopped me in the hallway. We chatted about the weather, the rising cost of living, the usual neighborhood pleasantries. Then she looked at me with a peculiar glint in her eye and said, "This old building, it has stories, doesn't it? If you listen closely enough, you can almost hear them talking to you." I paused, my breath catching in my throat, a sudden wave of understanding washing over me. "Yes," I replied, a soft smile forming on my lips. "I suppose it does." She just nodded, a knowing expression on her face, and then continued on her way, leaving me standing there with a renewed sense of wonder and a confirmation that perhaps I wasn't alone in hearing the building's silent narratives. That brief encounter with my neighbor, though seemingly insignificant, something for me. It wasn't just my imagination, nor was I simply prone to flights of fancy. The old apartment, with its high ceilings and creaking floorboards, truly did possess a unique resonance, a subtle symphony of unexplained sounds that had, at different times, whispered to its inhabitants. It wasn't a universal language, perhaps, but a dialect understood by those who were willing to listen, to truly open their senses to the subtle frequencies of the unknown. I still find myself, sometimes, catching a glimpse of a fleeting shadow in my peripheral vision, or hearing a faint, almost melodic hum that quickly dissipates into the background noise of the city. These occurrences are rare now, more like distant echoes than immediate experiences, but they serve as gentle reminders of the time when the apartment felt truly alive with its own unseen presence. It's a comforting thought in a strange way to know that I shared a space, however fleetingly, with something that existed beyond the ordinary, something that communicated not through words, but through the subtle language of sound. The apartment, in its quiet dignity, has returned to its familiar rhythm, its daily breathing of wood and plaster. The sunlight streams through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a silent ballet that holds its own kind of magic. The city hums outside, a constant, comforting presence, and within these walls, a different kind of quiet now resides. It's a quiet that is no longer empty, but filled with the lingering memory of whispers, taps, and the beautiful, haunting melody of an old waltz. It's a quiet that speaks of stories, of histories, of the delicate boundary between what is known and what forever remains, wonderfully, inexplicably unseen. And as the years have passed, and I've grown more comfortable in this old space, I've come to appreciate the profound gift of those unexplained sounds. They taught me to listen more deeply, to observe more closely, and to embrace the beautiful mysteries that exist just beyond our everyday understanding. They transformed a simple apartment into a place of quiet wonder, a sanctuary where the veil between worlds felt just a little thinner, a little more permeable. And sometimes, when the light is just so, or the wind sighs through the ancient eaves, I can almost hear them again, those soft, inexplicable sounds, a gentle lullaby from the unseen world, beckoning me to listen, to remember, to simply be. The memories are like soft whispers now, intermingled with the mundane details of daily life, yet they retain their distinct character, their unique resonance. I often find myself looking at a particular wall or a specific corner of a room and recalling a distinct sound that once emanated from that very spot. The faint scratching behind the bookshelf, the soft thud in the ceiling, the almost imperceptible breath near my ear. Each memory is a thread in the rich tapestry of my experience in this apartment. It's a history that only I truly understand, a personal narrative woven with the supernatural and the serene. Living in an old building often means coexisting with its inherent quirks, the drafts, the settling sounds, the occasional mysterious creaks. But the sounds in my apartment went beyond mere structural eccentricities. They possessed an intentionality, a subtle language that hinted at an unseen intelligence, a presence that was, for a time, a quiet participant in my life. And though I never fully understood its purpose or its origin, The mere fact of its existence brought a profound depth to my understanding of space, of reality, and of the many layers of being that might exist just beyond our immediate perception. I still find myself, on particularly quiet nights, turning off all the artificial lights and sitting in the gentle glow of the city outside, simply listening, not with the anxious anticipation I once felt, but with a calm, almost meditative reverence. I'm listening for the symphony of the old building itself, the soft groans of the floorboards, the gentle rattle of the old windows in the wind, the distant murmur of the city. And within that symphony, I sometimes imagine I can still hear the faintest echoes of those unexplained sounds, a fleeting whisper, a ghost of a tap, a lingering note from a waltz played long ago. They are gentle reminders of a time when the apartment truly spoke to me, and in doing so, opened my ears to the unspoken narratives that exist all around us, if only we take the time to truly listen. The experience has changed me, subtly but undeniably. I've become more patient, more observant, more open to the possibilities that lie beyond the mundane. The apartment, with its history of unexplained sounds, has become a teacher, imparting lessons about presence, about perception, and about the delicate dance between what is seen and what remains hidden. It's a place where the ordinary brushes shoulders with the extraordinary, where the everyday hum of life is sometimes punctuated by the whispers of the ethereal. And in that unique blend, I have found a quiet contentment, a profound appreciation for the enduring mysteries that continue to unfold, even in the most familiar of spaces. And so, my story of the unexplained sounds in my old apartment continues, not with dramatic revelations or terrifying encounters, but with a gentle, ongoing rumination on the nature of mystery itself. It's a story of listening, of waiting, of feeling the subtle pulse of a world that exists just beyond our immediate grasp. It's a story that reminds me that even in the quietest corners of our lives, there can be profound depth, unseen companions, and the enduring whisper of something truly magical and utterly unexplained. And as the night deepens and the world outside settles into its own gentle sleep, I find myself still listening, still wondering, and still, softly, smiling. The apartment, now more than just a place of residence, had truly become a silent character in my life's ongoing narrative, a repository of subtle mysteries and profound quietudes. Each scratch on the old wooden door frame, each faint stain on the ceiling, seemed to hold a memory, a resonance of the unseen events that had unfolded within its walls. I no longer actively sought out explanations, for the mystery itself had become a comfortable companion, a gentle hum beneath the surface of my daily existence. It was as if the apartment had revealed a part of its true self to me, a secretive inner life, and then, satisfied with my quiet acceptance, had receded back into its subtle dance of whispers and shadows. There was a particular quality to the light in the apartment, especially in the late afternoons, when the sun dipped low and cast long, dancing shadows across the living room floor. In those moments, the air itself seemed to thicken, to hum with an almost palpable energy, and I would sometimes feel a fleeting sense of a presence, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if a gentle breath had been taken in an empty room. It wasn't a chilling sensation, but rather one of quiet acknowledgement, a brief communion with the ethereal echoes that still lingered. I would simply pause, breathe deeply, and allow myself to be enveloped in that unique, almost sacred quietude, a silence that felt rich with unspoken stories. I remember one particularly stormy night, the kind where the rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled like a mournful spirit through the city streets. The old building groaned and shuddered, a symphony of creaks and moans that would normally have kept me awake. But on this night, amidst the cacophony of the storm, I heard something else. A very faint, almost imperceptible tinkle, like a tiny bell ringing from far, far away. It was incredibly delicate, barely audible above the storm's fury, yet it was distinct, a clear, sweet sound that seemed to cut through the chaos. It happened only once, a single ethereal note, and then it was gone, swallowed by the wind and the rain. I lay there, wrapped in my blanket, a shiver running down my spine, not of fear, but of profound wonder. The storm outside raged, a powerful display of nature's raw energy, and yet within the sanctuary of my old apartment, something incredibly delicate and mysterious had momentarily made its presence known. It was another facet of the apartment's personality, another layer to its subtle language, and it left me with a deep sense of awe, a quiet reverence for the unseen forces that sometimes choose to interact with our world. That tiny, ethereal tinkle became another precious memory, another thread in the tapestry of my unique experience within those old walls. As the seasons turned and the years continued their gentle flow, I found that my perception of the apartment itself had deepened. It wasn't just a collection of rooms and hallways. It was a living entity, a quiet observer of countless lives, a silent keeper of untold stories. The unglazed pottery on the windowsill, the faded pattern on the old wallpaper, the worn spots on the floorboards, each detail seemed to hold a whisper of the past, a subtle resonance of the lives that had unfolded within its embrace. And amidst these tangible remnants, the memory of the unexplained sounds continued to weave its delicate thread, a reminder of the intangible, the ethereal, the beautiful mysteries that had once graced its space. I often think about the nature of those sounds, pondering their source, their intent, their message. Were they remnants of past lives, echoes trapped within the building's very fabric? Or were they something more active, a gentle, conscious presence that simply chose to interact in a subtle, non-intrusive way? The ambiguity itself became a source of fascination, allowing for endless contemplation and a quiet appreciation for the vastness of the unknown. It was a beautiful enigma, a quiet puzzle that offered comfort in its very lack of a definitive solution. The apartment in its quietude has become a place of deep introspection for me. I've spent countless hours simply being within its walls, reading, writing, listening to music, or simply allowing my thoughts to drift. And in those moments of quiet contemplation, I sometimes feel a gentle sense of companionship, a soft, almost imperceptible warmth that permeates the air, a silent acknowledgement from the unseen energies that once, and perhaps still do, reside within this old, beloved space. It's a comfort that transcends explanation, a feeling of being quietly watched over, gently accompanied, in the serene solitude of my own home. My friends and family, while supportive, eventually stopped asking about the ghosts in my apartment. They understood, I think, that it was a deeply personal experience, something that transcended casual conversation or skeptical dismissal. It had become a part of who I was, a unique thread woven into the fabric of my own story, and they respected that quiet understanding. Sometimes a knowing glance would pass between me and a close friend, a silent acknowledgement of the other world I had briefly touched, and that was enough. The validation wasn't necessary. The experience itself was its own profound truth. The memory of the music, especially that old waltz, remains vividly etched in my mind. It was a moment of pure, ethereal beauty, a sound that spoke of longing, of forgotten elegance, of a time long past. I've often tried to find a similar melody, to discover the source of that haunting tune, but it remains elusive, a unique soundtrack to a supernatural encounter. It's a reminder that beauty can manifest in the most unexpected of ways, even through the unseen, the unexplained, weaving itself into the fabric of our lives with a delicate, unforgettable grace. And so, as the seasons continue to turn, and the city outside hums its never-ending song, I remain in my old apartment, a quiet observer, a silent listener. The unexplained sounds have receded, becoming whispers of memory, echoes in the profound quietude. But their impact remains, a permanent etching on my soul, a gentle reminder that the world holds more mysteries than we can ever comprehend, and that sometimes the most profound experiences are found not in grand spectacles, but in the subtle, ethereal whispers of an old apartment, speaking its silent, beautiful truth in the dead of night. The quietude that now permeates the apartment is a different kind of silence than what I initially encountered. It is not an empty, echoing void, but rather a silence pregnant with memory, a rich stillness that seems to hum with the lingering resonance of past events. It's as if the walls themselves have absorbed the whispers, the taps, the phantom footsteps, and now hold them close, releasing only the faintest echoes on rare occasions, just enough to remind me that the boundary between what is real and what is ethereal is often far more permeable than we imagine. This apartment, to me, has become a living testament to that delicate interplay, a silent guardian of secrets whispered through time. I often find myself observing the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that stream through the tall windows, each tiny particle a testament to the passage of time, to the continuous, subtle motion of life even in what appears to be stillness. And in those moments, I sometimes imagine that these dancing specks are not just dust, but tiny, ephemeral manifestations of the unseen presence that once so actively shared my space. It's a whimsical thought, perhaps, but it brings a smile to my face, a gentle acknowledgement of the magic that can exist in the mundane, if only we allow ourselves to perceive it. The experiences in this old apartment have subtly, yet profoundly, reshaped my understanding of reality itself. I've learned to embrace the unknown, to find comfort in ambiguity, and to appreciate the intricate layers of existence that lie just beyond our immediate senses. The world, to me, is now a much larger, more mysterious place, filled with hidden depths and unspoken narratives. And this apartment, with its history of unexplained sounds, served as my gentle guide, my quiet mentor, in this journey of expanded perception. It opened my ears, not just to audible sounds, but to the silent language of possibility. There are certain times of day when the apartment seems to hold its breath, when an almost palpable stillness descends, particularly in the late hours of the night, long after the city's distant hum has softened to a mere whisper. In these moments, I sometimes find myself feeling a subtle shift in the air, a faint coolness, or a momentary feeling of being gently watched. It's not intrusive, nor is it alarming. Rather, it's a soft, almost tender awareness, a fleeting connection to something unseen, a quiet acknowledgement of a lingering presence. It's like feeling the brush of a spider web in the dark, a momentary touch that dissipates as quickly as it appears, leaving only the memory of its ethereal contact. I've come to understand that the apartment's sounds were not about fear, but about communication, about presence. They were a gentle invitation to perceive beyond the obvious, to listen with a different kind of ear, to feel with a more subtle sensitivity. And in accepting that invitation, I embarked on a journey of quiet discovery, unraveling not a terrifying mystery, but a beautiful, profound truth about the hidden life of an old building and the ethereal energies it might hold within its ancient walls. It was a lesson in humility, in the recognition that our human perception is but a small window into the vastness of existence. The furniture, the artwork, the books on the shelves, everything in the apartment now seems imbued with a deeper meaning, as if they too were silent witnesses to the ethereal ballet that once unfolded. The old armchair in the living room, where I often sat reading, now feels like a place where countless hours of silent listening occurred, where the whispers and taps were most acutely felt. It's a comfortable familiarity, a silent acknowledgement of a shared history between myself and the very objects that furnish my home, objects that once played a role, however passive, in the unfolding of the unexplained. I sometimes wonder what stories the apartment will tell to its next inhabitants, whenever that time may come. Will they also hear the faint scratching, the distant waltz? Will they feel the gentle presence that once made itself known to me? Or will the apartment choose a different form of communication, a new language for a new listener? It's a thought that brings a touch of poignant curiosity, a sense of passing on a cherished secret, a subtle narrative that continues to unfold through the generations of those who reside within its quiet embrace. My experience has fostered in me a deep respect for the subtle energies of places, for the way history and emotion can linger, leaving an indelible imprint on the very fabric of a building. It's a testament to the idea that buildings are not just inert structures of brick and mortar, but living entities, breathing and settling, holding memories and sometimes, perhaps, even consciousness. This apartment, for me, embodies that profound truth, a quiet monument to the unseen, the unheard, the beautifully unexplained. And so, my story winds its way through the quiet passages of time, much like the gentle flow of a river, carrying with it the echoes of inexplicable sounds and the profound lessons learned in their presence. The apartment remains, steadfast and silent, a constant presence in my life, a quiet guardian of shared secrets. And in its enduring stillness, I find a deep sense of peace, a quiet understanding that the most profound truths are often whispered, not shouted, revealed not in grand gestures, but in the subtle, ethereal language of the night. It is a home, yes, but it is also a living reminder that the world is far more mysterious and magnificent than we often allow ourselves to imagine. And in that imagining, in that quiet listening, I continue to find comfort and a profound sense of wonder. The sun, as it rises each morning, casts a fresh, often golden light into the apartment, banishing the shadows of the night, and for a time, pushing the ethereal memories further into the quiet corners. Yet, even in the brightness of day, the apartment retains a certain gravitas, an almost imperceptible hum that hints at the layers of experience it holds within its ancient framework. It's a feeling that has become as familiar to me as the scent of old wood or the specific way the light falls on the worn floorboards. This familiarity, far from breeding contempt, has instead cultivated a deep and abiding affection for this space, a sense of belonging to something larger and older than myself. I've often wondered if the presence, or the residual energy, whatever it truly was drawn to a certain kind of quietude, a specific vibrational frequency that my own presence created within the apartment. Perhaps my own introspective nature, my willingness to listen without judgment, to observe without demanding immediate answers, created an environment where such subtle communication could flourish. It's a comforting thought to imagine that I inadvertently fostered a space for these unseen narratives to unfold, becoming not just a resident, but a quiet custodian of the apartment's unique, ethereal life. The world outside continues its relentless march of progress and change, but within the walls of my old apartment, time seems to flow differently, with a gentle, unhurried cadence. The sounds of the city, once a constant backdrop, now feel more distant, more like a murmur from another realm, while the subtle internal symphony of the building, its creaks, its sighs, its occasional mysterious shivers, becomes more prominent, more intimate. It's a deliberate choice, I've realized, to attune myself to this internal rhythm, to listen to the whispers of the past that still resonate within these walls, rather than to be swept away by the clamor of the present. I've learned to appreciate the subtle beauty in the impermanence of things, even of sounds. The fact that the most distinct manifestations of the unexplained ceased, leaving only faint echoes and powerful memories, feels like a natural progression, a gentle fading rather than an abrupt departure. It suggests a cycle, a natural ebb and flow of ethereal energy, perhaps moving on to new spaces or simply returning to a more dormant state, awaiting a new listener, a new receptive soul to share its quiet tales. There's a quiet wisdom in this understanding, a sense of acceptance that not all stories are meant to be continuously told in the same way, but rather to evolve, to transform, to become a part of the silent history. Sometimes, when I'm alone and the world is particularly quiet, I'll close my eyes and try to reconstruct the sounds in my mind's ear. The delicate scratching, the precise tapping, the soft, rhythmic thuds, the almost imperceptible whispers, and of course, the haunting, beautiful waltz. I can almost hear them, feel them, the spectral presence that once danced through my nights. It's a form of meditation, a journey back to a time of profound wonder and subtle revelation. And when I open my eyes, the apartment is still there, solid and real, but now imbued with an extra layer of richness, a depth that only those memories can provide. The experience has instilled in me a deeper sense of empathy, not just for people but for places. I see old buildings now not just as structures, but as entities with their own histories, their own personalities, their own hidden lives. I wonder what stories they might tell, what echoes they might hold within their walls if only we were to pause to truly listen, to open ourselves to their unique forms of communication. It's a beautiful way to move through the world, to perceive the unseen narratives that constantly unfold around us, if only we have the sensitivity to perceive them. And so, my life in this old apartment continues, a quiet tapestry woven with the threads of the mundane and the mysteriously ethereal. The unexplained sounds have become a part of its enduring legend, a personal mythology that enriches my daily existence and reminds me of the vast, intricate beauty of the unknown. It is a story not of fear, but of fascination, a journey into the subtle heart of an old building, and in doing so, a journey into a deeper understanding of the world and of myself. The apartment stands as a silent testament, a gentle whisper in the heart of the city, forever holding its secrets, forever sharing its quiet truths with those who are willing to listen. The evenings in the apartment now carry a particular weight, a gentle solemnity that wasn't there before the sounds began, nor even during their most active period. It is the weight of memory, of reflection, of the countless hours spent in quiet observation, straining to hear the next whisper, the next tap. This atmosphere is not oppressive. Rather, it feels like a comforting presence, a familiar cloak that wraps around me as the daylight fades and the world outside begins its nightly retreat. It's in these long, quiet evenings that the apartment truly reveals its enduring character, a blend of ancient solidity and ethereal grace. I've learned to savor the profound stillness that occasionally descends upon the apartment, a silence so complete that it feels almost tangible, as if the very air has paused to listen. In these moments, the absence of sound is not an emptiness, but a canvas upon which the faintest echoes of the past can, in my mind's ear, briefly replay. The memory of the little bells tinkled during the stormy night, the delicate notes of the waltz, the soft, hesitant thuds, they all coalesce into a silent symphony, a private concert played out within the quiet chambers of my own recollection. It's a beautiful, internal performance that deepens my connection to this unique space. The experience of living with the unexplained has also given me a profound sense of humility. It has shown me that our human-centric view of the world, our reliance on purely scientific or rational explanations, can often limit our understanding of the deeper, more subtle realities that exist. There are forces, energies, and presences that operate on frequencies beyond our immediate grasp, and to deny their existence simply because we cannot measure them or dissect them is to close ourselves off to a vast and wondrous dimension of being. The apartment, in its quiet wisdom, has taught me this lesson gently, patiently, through its subtle whispers and its enduring silence. I sometimes find myself tracing the patterns in the old wooden floorboards with my bare feet, feeling the smooth, worn texture that bears the imprint of countless footsteps through the decades. And as I do, I imagine those who walked here before me, their lives, their joys, their sorrows. I wonder if they, too, felt the subtle currents, heard the faint echoes, or if the apartment chose only certain souls to share its deepest secrets with. It's a meditative act, a silent communion with the past, a way of acknowledging the continuous flow of life and experience that has permeated this space long before my arrival and will continue long after I am gone. The simple act of being in the apartment now feels like a constant, gentle dialogue with its history, both known and unknown. Every creak, every sigh of the wind through the tall windows, every shift in the house's ancient frame is imbued with a deeper significance. They are not just random noises, but elements of a larger narrative, subtle cues in an ongoing story that the apartment itself is quietly telling. And I, the quiet listener, am privileged to be a part of that unfolding tale, even if my role is simply to observe and to appreciate. My journey with the unexplained sounds has become a quiet testament to the enduring power of mystery in a world that often strives for absolute clarity and immediate answers. It has taught me that sometimes the most profound experiences are found not in resolution, but in acceptance of the unknown, in the willingness to simply be with what cannot be explained. The apartment, in its silent grace, has become a symbol of this truth, a sacred space where the veil between worlds thins and the whispers of eternity can sometimes be heard. And in that listening, in that quiet acceptance, I have found a profound and lasting peace. The passage of time in the apartment has now taken on an almost dreamlike quality, where the vividness of the past experiences blends seamlessly with the tranquility of the present. The unexplained sounds, once a source of anxious curiosity, have transmuted into cherished memories, like old photographs gently placed in the album of my mind. They are not forgotten, but rather held with a soft reverence, brought forth occasionally in moments of quiet reflection, allowing me to revisit that unique period when the apartment truly spoke in its ethereal tongue. This subtle evolution from active mystery to quiet reminiscence has deepened my appreciation for the apartment's enduring story. I've often caught myself simply staring at the walls, particularly the ones that once seemed to be the source of the most distinct whispers and taps. There's nothing visibly different about them, of course, yet to me, they are imbued with a certain history, a silent energy that continues to resonate. It's like looking at an ancient tree, knowing it has witnessed countless seasons and held innumerable secrets within its bark and branches. The walls of my apartment are much the same, silent observers and quiet custodians of a period when the veil between the tangible and the intangible seemed particularly thin, allowing glimpses of another layer of existence. This profound experience has also subtly influenced my creative pursuits. My writing, my way of seeing the world, has become more attuned to the unseen, to the spaces between words, to the unspoken narratives that hover just beyond the surface of everyday life. The apartment, in its quiet way, became a muse, an inspiration, a constant reminder that true depth often lies in what is not immediately apparent, in the subtle currents and hidden depths that only careful observation and open-hearted listening can reveal. It has taught me to look for the extraordinary in the ordinary, to find the magic woven into the fabric of daily existence. The silence in the apartment, which was once occasionally punctuated by the ethereal sounds, now feels complete, a whole and unbroken expanse that cradles me in its embrace. Yet within that completeness, there is a distinct texture, a richness that speaks of its past. It's not an empty silence, but a living silence, filled with the lingering warmth of forgotten presences and the gentle hum of stories untold. It's a silence that invites contemplation, that fosters introspection, and that gently reminds me of the beautiful, inexplicable events that once unfolded within its quiet confines. I've learned to approach life with a heightened sense of wonder, a quiet appreciation for the subtle mysteries that constantly surround us. The apartment, in its subtle teaching, has cultivated in me a willingness to believe, not in a naive or unquestioning way, but with an open heart and a curious mind. It has shown me that the universe is far vaster and more intricate than our limited human perceptions often allow, and that there is a profound beauty in acknowledging the limits of our knowledge, in embracing the sheer, delightful unknown. And so, as the seasons continue their gentle cycle, and the city outside breathes its ceaseless rhythm, I find myself deeply rooted in this old apartment, a quiet sentinel in a space that once buzzed with unseen life. The unexplained sounds have faded into memory, but their impact remains, a quiet, enduring legacy that has reshaped my understanding of home, of self, and of the mysterious, beautiful world that exists just beyond the edges of our perception. This apartment is more than just a place where I live. It is a repository of wonder, a sanctuary of quiet truths, and a constant, gentle reminder that some stories are meant to be heard not with the ears, but with the heart. The sense of peace that now pervades my life within the apartment is a deep, settled calm, far removed from the initial apprehension and then fascination that the unexplained sounds first evoked. It's a peace born of acceptance, of having walked through the veil of mystery and emerged not with definitive answers, but with a profound, quiet understanding. This understanding is not intellectual. It's a visceral, emotional knowing that has integrated itself into the very core of my being, making the apartment feel not just like a home, but like a spiritual anchor, a place where the ordinary and extraordinary softly intertwine. I often find myself observing the play of shadows and light across the rooms, especially in the moments between dusk and full night. The way the corners deepen, the way familiar objects seem to take on new contours in the fading light, always reminds me of how perception shifts, how what we see is often influenced by the subtlety of our focus and the openness of our minds. It was in such shifting light that the sounds often felt most present, most tangible, existing in that liminal space where the familiar dissolves into the faintly unknown. These twilight hours in the apartment have become a time of quiet reverence, a silent nod to the mysteries that once danced in those very shadows. The apartment, in its enduring silence, has become a testament to the power of memory, not just my own, but perhaps the collective memory embedded within its very structure. It feels like a living archive, holding the echoes of countless lives and experiences, and my time here, particularly the period of the unexplained sounds, has added another unique layer to that rich historical tapestry. I am just one thread in its long and intricate pattern, a temporary resident who was granted a rare glimpse into its deeper, unseen narrative. This realization fosters a sense of profound connection, a quiet belonging to a story far grander than my individual existence. I have come to view the entire experience not as a series of isolated supernatural events, but as a continuous unfolding, a gentle revelation of the apartment's innate character. It was its way of communicating, of sharing its history, its essence, with a receptive soul. And while the direct manifestations have quieted, the lessons learned, the expanded perception, the deeper sense of wonder, these remain constant and unwavering. The apartment has, in essence, taught me how to listen not just with my ears, but with my entire being, to the subtle vibrations of life that pulse through everything, seen and unseen. The very air in the apartment, to me, now feels infused with a subtle, almost spiritual quality. It's a lightness, a clarity that seems to hum with the lingering presence of something beautiful and ancient. It's a feeling that makes waking up in this space a quiet joy, and falling asleep within its walls a deep, tranquil surrender. The apartment has become more than just shelter. It's a sanctuary, a place where the heart feels at ease, and the mind is gently invited to contemplate the infinite possibilities that lie just beyond the reach of our everyday senses. And so, my life in the old apartment flows on, a continuous, slow-paced narrative woven with threads of deep contentment and quiet contemplation. The unexplained sounds are now a beautiful, cherished part of its history, a secret shared between the old walls and my listening heart. They taught me to open my senses, to embrace the unknown, and to find profound beauty in the subtle whispers of a world far richer and more mysterious than I ever dared to imagine. This apartment, in its quiet grace, continues to be my haven, a place where the veil between worlds thins and the echoes of eternity gently sing.